Jump right into it. So we're going to start with the basics. Radio to radio. Each radio that transmits is called a station. And for this example, we'll use a GMRS frequency. Both radios set their frequency to 462.700, also known as GMRS channel 21. And in this picture, station 1 is transmitting on 462.700, and station 2 is listening on that frequency. The two stations have to take turns because the radios can only either send or receive at a time on a single frequency. So they take turns talking and listening. When the two radios communicate on a single frequency like this, it's called simplex. So one frequency is simplex. Now, when you have multiple radios broadcasting on the same frequency at the same time, you'll experience an overlap or interference or collision. But let's say each of the stations were keying up at different times. It'll still get confusing because you'll have multiple conversations going on the same frequency. And sometimes you only want to hear the transmissions that are meant for you. That's where tones come in. A tone is a specific sound that plays when you transmit. It's inaudible to the human ear because the frequency is too low, but the radios can detect it. And the receiving station can opt to ignore all the other transmissions that don't have the tone. So it essentially just acts as a filter. It filters out other stations and only listens for transmissions that have that tone. Now, tones, let's talk about tones. Tones are a special sound that plays while you transmit. Humans can't hear it because it's below 250 hertz. Tones don't make your transmission private. This is a common misconception. They don't make your transmission private. And it's up to the receiver to filter out any transmission that is missing the tone. So if the receiver doesn't have tones on, then it'll just hear all transmissions on that frequency. So if the receiver doesn't have tones turned on, it'll receive everything. And tones are kind of like Alexa. Think Alexa. Your Alexa device is always listening to you. It's listening to all your conversations, but it's ignoring everything until you say the key word, Alexa. Then it starts paying attention. Tones are also known as, we use these terms interchangeably, PL tones, CTCSS, tone squelch. And then there's also digital tones. Essentially, they work the same way, but I'm not going to get into details. It's also known as DCS or DPL. Now we move on to the topic of repeaters. Repeaters are just stations that retransmit or rebroadcast everything it hears. But because VHF and UHF signals require line of sight, the higher the station, the further the signal will travel. And that's why repeaters are usually on top of a high hill or a mountain. And in this illustration, we have two stations at the bottom of the hill, and they have difficulty communicating with each other because they're in the middle of a concrete jungle. They're blocked by buildings or other stuff. They might not be able to reach each other, but they can both reach the station at the top of the hill, otherwise known as the repeater. And the repeater can easily reach all of the stations at the bottom of the hill. So how exactly does a repeater work? The repeater is actually just two linked radios. One is dedicated to listening while the other is dedicated to broadcasting. Listening, RX, broadcasting, TX. The TX side immediately starts rebroadcasting whatever the RX hears. But you can't have it listen and broadcast at the same time on the same frequency like we were talking about, right? One, because it'll cause a collision, or yeah, it'll cause a collision. And also, the RX side might mistakenly listen to the TX side and rebroadcast itself. So that would cause like a loop. So, how do we fix this? The repeater listens and transmits on different frequencies. Now they can listen and broadcast at the same time without causing a collision or loop. In this example, the GMRS repeater is transmitting on 462.700, but it's listening on 467.700, 462.700, and 467.700. That's 5 megahertz apart. In other words, it's a plus 5 megahertz offset. So, for an example, hypothetically, if it was 462.700 and 456.700, then that would be a negative 6 megahertz offset. You get it? Furthermore, the repeater will filter out transmissions with PL tones so that it doesn't have to rebroadcast everything and anything on 467.700. It'll filter out signals that are noise, signals that are meant for other repeaters, etc., etc. Repeaters will usually broadcast with the same PL tone, but it's up to you if you want to filter out any other signal on that frequency or not. Usually people don't even set an inbound PL tone on their personal radios. That way they can hear all traffic from all repeaters on that frequency. So, recapping on repeaters, it's just two linked radios. One side listens for its special tone. The other side retransmits what it receives. It needs a tone so that it doesn't rebroadcast all the garbage it receives. Also needs a tone to distinguish and filter out transmissions meant for other repeaters. And it needs two different frequencies because it can't receive and broadcast on the same frequency at the same time. And the difference between the RX and TX frequencies are the plus minus offset. So, what does that mean for you when you program your radio? Well, for Simplex, when you program your radio for a Simplex frequency, you just need to enter the frequency. And optionally, you can add a tone, but it wouldn't make a big difference. And if you set a receiving tone, then you're going to filter out everything else on that frequency, so it might not make sense. If you want to program a repeater, you need the receiving frequency, the frequency that you're listening to, the frequency that you monitor, and the plus or minus offset. That determines what frequency you're going to transmit to the repeater on. That's going to determine the repeater's inbound frequency. And then, of course, if you're going to program in a repeater, you're going to need the PL tone, the TX PL tone, because otherwise the repeater is going to ignore everything else. And that's about it.